Testing. All right, we'd like to get going. If everyone could filter into their seats. All right. If I could have your attention. Welcome to the executive briefing sponsored by the North Dakota Water Education Foundation. We have a few presenters and then we will have lunch. First of all, I want to thank Dakota Supply Group for sponsoring the recording of today's session. Our recording will be available on our North Dakota Water YouTube channel at the conclusion of the meetings this week. Our first presenter is Todd Feland. Todd was appointed as the Grand Forks City Administrator in 2013 and previously served as the Grand Forks Public Works Director for 13 years. He graduated from the University of North Dakota with his undergraduate and graduate degrees, and he grew up in Mandan. So please help me welcome Todd.
Welcome to Grand Forks. Thanks for all being here. I'm going to work with my colleague Al Grasser, who's our city engineer. So I'm going to talk about the water treatment plant, then we'll hand it over to Al on the flood protection side. So, and Al, thanks for switching order on this thing too. So, well, I'm going to tell you a 20+ year journey to get to a water treatment plant, and I think this is a good story of master planning, pilot testing, and getting to final execution. Over a long period of time. So I think it's a really good story in that. On the left, if you go out to the water treatment plant, I think tomorrow morning, you'll see the guy on the left, which is Fred Gatz, and he's our lead water treatment plant operator. So he's the guy who actually knows something day to day. So he gives a great tour. So if you want to go out there, I think it's an impressive facility, and Fred gives a great tour. We have a new mayor, and Mayor Buchenski to his right, and then that's myself turning the valve back in July of last year. So I think this slide says several things. Number one, it's taken a long time, and we kind of kept this project going as a strategic priority through many different city councils, through different mayors to get to where we are today. So it's really a story that this was always a strategic priority, no matter who the politicians were here in Grand Forks. And I think the other part of this story in this plant, it was during the pandemic. So the pandemic was a bit challenging, and for our operators to operate two plants, getting this started in the midst of the pandemic, you know, our operators really did yeoman's work, and I'm really incredibly proud of all our water treatment plant operators, their commitment to Grand Forks and all the great things they did without asking for a whole lot of credit. So they really are the day-to-day heroes as part of this story. Again, I'm gonna say this is, I think, a good story of trying to really look at global integrated master planning of our water system, working strategically on piloting and on the engineering process, and finally working on funding and implementation, really to get into the outcome that I'm going to talk about today. Again, I know Al's going to talk about the flood protection and project, but really as part of the flood of 1997, we took a step back about what do we want to do as part of our long-term water treatment plant strategy and water distribution strategy. And similar to what if it's Minot or Fargo, really we decided that our downtown water treatment plant, which had been the home site on the forks of the river of Red Lake and the Red River, had been our site for 100+ years. With a facility that was built in 1956, 68, and 84 was not a long-term solution. And so we decided, thankfully the flood hit, and thankfully one of the things that we did do is maybe we should take a step back and not add on to this facility, but look at a new way forward, looking at the next 100 years and not just boxing ourselves into all the decisions we had made over the previous 100 years. And you can see where the green line is where the flood wall goes through Grand Forks and the downtown. Again, if you go on the tour tomorrow, you'll see that. And you can see to the wet side of the flood wall, those are some of our water assets that were on the wet side. So it really became an opportune time for us to start shifting some of our assets over these 20 plus years. Again, we got the water plant up and going after the flood and invested $7 million. And then we also invested another $3 million really to set ourselves up on the distribution side to start moving our water system so that we could serve the south and to the west of Grand Forks. And really this is what the community did post-flood. And Ken Veen is here, and I started with the city of Grand Forks in November of '97, and actually Ken Veen, who was with us, he was a city engineer, public works director. He hired me as part of being a flood recovery type person, so that's how I got to become public works director in 2000, and eventually city administration administrator. So Ken's been was part of the initial planning of both our water system here and the flood protection system. So when Ken left in 2000 to go work for Alter Health System, he really set the stage for a lot of the implementation, the execution that we did along the way, along with working with Mr. Grasser. So really what we did, and I think this is really, we invested $52 million post-flood from 2000, I say to 2012, but most of that was completed between 2000 and probably 2005 or 6. And so what we did, number one, is we had intakes on the wet side, so we moved our intakes to the dry side downtown of the levee. So we draw water from the Red Lake and the Red River, so we moved those to the dry side of our levee system. We built a clear well and pump station to the west side of town. That would be the initial piece of the water treatment plant. We built dual transmission lines so that we could draw the water in on the intake, treat it at our old site, and then transmit that water to the clear well and pump station and distribute it throughout our distribution system to the west and to the south. With that, and then we had some residual ponds up there. So that's what we did to really set ourselves up for the last piece of the puzzle, which is the water treatment plant. We knew that was going to be the biggest piece of this whole investment, but we had to set up all these systems in advance. So that's what we did in regards to that. As part of that transmission line, when this was set up, we had the water treatment plant downtown that distributed treated water. And so once we moved started the water treatment plant on the west side of the city, that then started, those same transmission lines now are transmitting raw water to the water treatment plant. So it was a nice use of putting infrastructure in the right place. And so whether we were distributing treated water or raw water, those lines we knew over the long term were going to serve different purposes. As part of when we got that done, so this really shows all the detailed study we did over the last 20 years trying to get at the right water treatment plant. We're fortunate that we have 2 river sources coming in Grand Forks. That's good for drinking water. It's probably a challenge for flooding. But the surface water we have in Grand Forks is certainly not the Missouri River, so we're not blessed to have the Missouri River, so we have some real challenges trying to treat the drinking water here in Grand Forks. So really it shows that we did a lot of study on looking at what was the best option. In 2007-8, we determined we got to move to the west and so that we can better serve our community over the next 100 years. Something happened along the way. In 2008, there was the Great Recession in the United States and in the world, and we had Senator Dorgan we were working with, and we were hoping to get a cost share. This was going to be a federal, state, local funded project. So we did have an initial earmark in 2008, and obviously the Great Recession occurred. Earmarks went away, and then Senator Dorgan also retired and specifically retired from the Appropriations Committee on the Senate side. So we had to take a step back and look at how are we going to move forward with this particular project. And so we made a strategic investment at our existing site to invest $2.8 million into that to keep it going, knowing that we probably need a 10-year time horizon to get to a new treatment plant, and that really served us well. So when you look at the valve turning in 2020, we got 12 years out of that investment to keep that particular facility going. Along the way, we did a lot of evaluations, pilot testing. Also, the Devil's Lake impacts really came at a strategic time with the outlet that we could take a look at what that source water was, how it was going to change the Red River. and what kind of treatment technologies that we would need. We also took into account with the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, bringing Missouri River water to the Red River Basin during drought periods, of how that would impact our treatment capabilities. So we tried to take all the wide range of kind of surface water that we may have to treat to try to design, construct, and execute a water treatment plant that would be able to treat a diverse and challenging water, source water. So the pilot testing, we focus a lot in Grand Forks on the Red River, but the truth is we use most of our source water we use from Red Lake. And so it's a better source water coming from Minnesota. So as the slide says, we use 80 to 95% of our water we draw from the Red Lake River. The only downside of the Red Lake River, it is as higher organics than the Red River does. Certainly the Red River is important to us, but we really rely day to day on the Red Lake River. We know the Red River is going to be incredibly important with the Red River Valley Water Supply, because the Red River is going to be the supply for that particular source when we move forward with that. The other really important part is that we're the only entity in the region with a intake on both the Red River and the Red Lake. And so when we do move forward with the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, Grand Forks is the one entity that we do have an intake on the Red River, not only to serve the Grand Forks, but the larger region as we need to. Now, over time, well, I think we were able to maintain, as I discussed, over this 20-year time horizon, this water treatment plant really was the right decision. We put it in the right location. And so we did a lot of engagement with our politicians and in the community, and through decision-making documents that, hey, number one, we made the right decision. And so over a series of different groups, we were always able to maintain that we made the right decisions. And I think we had good outreach, we had good engagement in the public, and to include with our policymakers. And that doesn't happen a lot of times. You know, sometimes you always worry every 2 years when you get new council members or commission members. Suddenly you're going a different direction, but we were able to maintain our course in that way. Here's really what we ultimately ended up in Grand Forks, is we ended up with a hybrid. So we were really concerned about going all in on a membrane RO facility, just because of our concerns with our source water. What if we have some bad days and something happens with our membranes? What are we gonna do? So we kind of chickened out a little bit, and so we went 50-50. So we went 50% of the plant is a conventional softening plant. The other 50% is a membrane reverse osmosis plant. I would say right now, the way that we're operating after a year, and if you go out and see Fred, I think the membrane RO facilities were operating better than we even piloted. So if we were to go back and do it over again, maybe we would have had some more guts, and we would have done the membrane RO, because that's really functioned really, really well. But the conventional facility was not only, you know, it was kind of an augmented conventional facility. We put in ozone, and we put in some kind of really augmented filters too on that. So it's just not a conventional facility. It's a little more of a augment facility on that. As we move forward, it is a 20 MGD facility. Prior to building this facility, we had a 16 MGD facility. And so it's about a 10 and 10. So as I said, half of it's in both sides. We can expand this up to 40. And so we can determine whether do we want to expand on the conventional side or the membrane ROs side of this particular plant. So that we always say this is a 50-year facility on a 100-year site, similar to our downtown facility in Grand Forks. So we always try to get our policymakers or our politicians to understand, hey, let's act like we're going to be here for the next 100 years. And so try to get them to think longer term in our community. Funding, and this was a really big deal. I know I mentioned the fact that we really wanted to move forward with the federal, state, and local. We forsake the federal, and then we worked with the state of North Dakota and the State Water Commission, and we've been very blessed on the water supply side of being funded. So the first almost $5 million was for design, and the remaining 30, and 9.9, or almost 10, all were related to construction. We did reach an agreement with the state of North Dakota to fund it 50-50 as part of moving forward. And so I think similar to Al's going to talk about the flood protection project. When Grand Forks In the late 90s, where the state cost share came up to 52 million. And so when you look at Grand Forks' flood protection system, I think our share of the flood protection is probably 200 million plus. When you think back now to what that $52 million investment, it seems rather paltry now. What a great investment from the state of North Dakota. But I think of all the fights that we had regarding where the state should invest, and now you look at the Minot and the Souris Valley, you look at the FM diversion. I think part of leadership is getting policymakers to understand these are wise investments, they're one-time investments, and at the end of the day, the local community is going to operate these things and maintain them day to day. And so I think on the flood protection side, Grand Forks led the way, and now look what we're doing across the state. It's quite incredible. It's always a sign of a really great plan when you're at the end and it's a great project, everyone's for it. And even the people that were really against it, they forget that they were against it. So I've seen that over and over again. I think similar on the water supply side, there was a lot of questions, why the heck does Grand Forks need, they should just fund it themselves. But now when you look through the State Water Commission and how they're funding, they're funding a rural water supply pot, they're funding a municipal water supply pot. And when you go through these on these biennia now, when they fund these things, no one's really questioning that now. And so there are lots of questions. If you were here 6 years ago, now when we go through that, everyone just assumes there has to be a pot for rural water supply and municipal water supply. So again, it's another story of being a leader, coming up with good strategies, sustaining, and suddenly everyone's was for that decision. The other thing we did, we were building this during the height of the oil boom out west. We were concerned that we were going to get competitive bids, if any bids, in this particular project. So we did move forward with a construction manager at risk process. We did that because we thought we could break it up into multiple bidding packages. And in our case, there were 55 total bid packages. We did that not only to break it up so that we could have more competitive bids, we could engage more local regional contractors, and we could get it going sooner rather than later. Than trying to really get to a final design and having 3 bids with general construction, mechanical, and electrical. So that's the strategy we did. I think we got really good bids. The other thing we were able to do is we were trying to find with our local cost share, which is a drinking water SRF loan. We were trying to debate whether it made sense if we do a revenue bond versus a SRF loan, because with the SRF, it has all the federal strings attached, American Iron and Steel, Davis-Bacon. And thankfully in North Dakota, our wages have gone up. So Davis-Bacon wages are less of an issue. But going to the SRF, the main increase on the plant, and it was $100+ million construction, $150 million overall budget on this. It was about an $8 million add to do American Iron and Steel versus being able to import it as part of the project. We also, I talked about having the community behind the project. We were able to pay a portion of our water treatment plant. We're implementing our share through rates and also through the sales tax. So we did pass a 1/2-cent sales tax in Grand Forks. So that 1/2 cent brings in about $5 million a year in Grand Forks. So about 2/3 of that goes to roads, about 1/3 goes to our water treatment plant debt service, and we pay the remaining part of our debt service through rates. So again, we were able to pass this sales tax with about 75% approval. So once again, we kind of really kept the public behind us on what we were doing. And really the results are, we have the water treatment plant out west here. And the Grand Forks is going to grow south to our flood protection limits. It's going to go west to where our diversion is. And through all these 20 years, we were able to set up the water system so it could grow and expand over this long time horizon that we have within our flood protection limits. So we also do serve the Grand Forks Air Force Base and the Grand Sky development as you see along Highway 2. And obviously with our regional treatment plant out west, it helps us to serve longer term regional partners, whether it's as part of the Red River Valley water supply or other needs, because now our plant can be easier interconnected as we move south and to the west. This is a water treatment plant. And again, we try to make it as nice as possible. So trying to act like we are somebody and we've been somewhere. And so let's act like this building looks great 20 years from now. So I think we've done that inside and out on this particular project. This is the control room. And the other thing we said, we always say, everyone says our people are the most important things. Okay. So it's one thing to say it, the other thing to do it. So what we try to do is create spaces in our water treatment plant that really demonstrated our operators are really important. So we try to create great working environments for our operators that have to be there 24/7. We try to have training and breakout rooms for them too, so they can meet and discuss and create some great spaces for them, and to just not treat, generally if you're in a city, everyone thinks if you work in City Hall, you're the most important human being in the organization. Really the most important human beings are the ones that are actually performing services for cities, and that's people that work in a water treatment plant. Pre-treatment's the key component to this water treatment plant. So if we can't pre-treat this water and take out all the stuff that's coming in from the river, we're going to struggle on the treatment side. So the pre-treatment serves both the conventional side and it serves the membrane RO side. So this has worked better than we ever anticipated to. So this was a huge win that we've been able to pre-treat some really challenging water. This is the conventional side, traditional softening. We added ozone. We never had this in our old plant. We added biological activated carbon filters, and so these are augmented filters to what we had previously. This is the membrane RO side. So first thing would be the ultrafiltration membrane basins. And these are some of the guts to the ultrafiltration. This is the RO membrane skids. And these are some of the guts to the RO skids. And really, that's the presentation. You're going to see I think if you get out there at 8 a.m., you're going to meet Fred, and you're going to see a terrific facility. And so I'm so thankful you're here in Grand Forks. And I think now I'm going to hand it over to Al on the flood protection side. So any questions? Sure. We do have them at our intake. We've discovered them, I think, about 2 to 3 years ago. So we do have zebra mussels on our intake screens. Our intake screens are, I'm going to say, 3 to 4 feet from the bottom of the river. And so we have done that. So we've done some flushing and some chemical additions that have kept them at bay. So we've been doing, both, flushing and adding chemicals to remove the zebra mussels. We do not currently. We serve the Grand Forks Air Force Base. We serve Grand Sky Development. East Central serves them drinking water, and then we do fire protection at Grand Sky. I think we're set up to do that in the future. So one of the arguments when we did this, that they wanted us to be more regional, and so I think that will come in time. I think East Central would probably like to take a portion of our south end customers and our west end customers. So we're having a bit of discussion on that too. So they want to take our growth. So we're trying to work out how do we make that fair and reasonable. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Todd. Our next presenter is Alan Grasser. Alan has been with the City of Grand Forks since 1984, starting as a project engineer. In 1990, he accepted the position of Assistant City Engineer and retained that title until 2001, when he was hired as the City Engineer. Alan has extensive background in subdivision development from the early concept levels through design and final construction. He has been involved in all significant flood fights, which started during the last wet cycle in the region. Alan's tenure as city engineer includes the period in which the flood protection project activities included property acquisition, as well as the actual construction phase. Active construction for the flood protection project occurred from 2000 through 2007. So please help me welcome Alan.
All right. Thanks, Jack. Welcome to Grand Forks. I understand we had a little bit of competition with another meeting maybe in Medora, so It's an impressively sized crowd considering the competition. So we're happy to have you in town. I'm going to talk about flood protection and flooding. And first thing I want to do is make sure that you're comfortable. Rest assured, there's going to be no flooding today or during the tour. We have everything under control. So, and I get reminded, it's a good thing I keep my day job and not a comedian. So with that, we'll go into the flood protection project background here for the city of Grand Forks. Quick background, a lot of you remember the flood in 1997 really triggered the triggering event for our flood protection project. We did have a project authorization in 1998. Now you look at that, that's only about a year and a half from the event to the authorization. We got lucky on a number of fronts regarding the project, and one of them was the fact that East Grand Forks actually had a flood study project already initiated through the Corps of Engineers. And we were able to kind of kickstart and jump onto that project initiation, which really gave us a head start on moving forward with the project. Otherwise, project development, through the federal process is quite lengthy. It also didn't hurt that we had a lot of national notoriety, which then generated a lot of political interest, and we had a great team shepherding that project development. I know one, Ken Bean is in the audience. He was one of the main players in getting the flood project really initiated. So 2000, we started the project agreement. We actually started construction in about 2000, late 2000, early 2001. We did finish things up basically in 2007 with a FEMA certification. Again, you look at that, that's 10 years from beginning to end. That's pretty impressive timeline. Quick overview of the flood protection project itself. This is a map of the flood protection. The red areas out here are the series of levees and flood walls that are along the river. There's a tieback levee down here to the south end that keeps water from sneaking around the backside. In addition, there's a flood diversion project in here that intercepts the overland flows that otherwise would come into town and kind of basically overwhelm the system. The main collection point for water in town is the English Coulee in here. Again, that water then gets diverted from the outlying areas and prevented from getting into that system. Even at that, the pump station on the English Coulee is one of the largest pump stations in North Dakota. Just some statistics, I won't go through all of them. There's lots of pumps, lots of miles of flood walls, levees, pedestrian access, trails, things like that. That's actually one of the things that I think the rank and file citizen in Grand Forks enjoys, certainly on a day-to-day basis, is the trail and greenway system out there. We call the greenway basically everything between the levee and the river. We'll point out just a couple of things in here. I don't know, as an engineer, I always get impressed with these things. We get the largest diameter storm sewer there is 120 inches. It's a 10-foot diameter storm sewer. Part of this thing included the raw water intake, which Mr. Feland had just got done talking about. Some caissons, which I'll talk about here again after a little bit. But the flood protection projects, they're a little bit, they remind me it's like an iceberg where, the majority of that structure is really out of sight. What you see is a small portion. The dollars, the work effort, and a lot of that actually is all underground in this case. Some quick stats here on our flooding. Our flood stage is at 28 feet. The flood of 1997 was 54.4. Now, our project was designed, what the Corps did is they looked at the flows in 97, and they said, well, if those flows had been contained within the limits of the flood protection project that we have today, the resulting elevation would have been basically 57 feet. So think about in terms, our water profile design is at 57 feet. Top of levee is at 60. Basically, that's your freeboard. We did actually add some additional local dollars and added to the top of the flood walls. We learned in 97, one of the Achilles heels on a flood fight are your structures. You really don't have a lot of ability to raise those things for a whole host of different issues. And so Grand Forks said, let's try to do what we can to add a patch to that Achilles heel. And so we put in an extra 3 feet on top of the flood walls with the idea that we can come back and add 3 feet to the top of the clay levees with clay or sandbags or whatever it might take to do that. So that's why you see a top of levee, the clay levees are 60 feet, top of the flood wall is 63. Here's some pictures of some of the lift stations. We worked extensively with the neighborhoods on designing lift stations that would fit into the neighborhood. These all happen to be kind of the brick type structures, but we actually have some in some of the more residential areas. They look so much like a home, they'll actually get door hangers for politicians and whatnot that are coming around, and it looks just like a house. Next thing we worked pretty extensively with individual neighborhoods are the flood walls. This is a couple of examples of flood walls here. Basically, they can produce a form that can give you kind of any texture that you're really looking for. They come back and they add the color as basically painting, a couple of different, sometimes layers of paint that go on there to create some of those two tones. This is an area in here, we had a couple of historical buildings over here. And you can see that the flood wall, number one, it's very, very close to the structures, but number two, the flood wall in here has got a different character. It's trying to match the general architecture of the building, some of the color and texture, things like that. So they can do a lot of that. This is another example of a flood wall. Again, just different colors, textures, tones. This particular one, you can't see it very well, but this is actually a planter. So you can have some plants and decorative features that go right along with the flood wall. Basically, each one of these were tailor-made to each individual neighborhood that they were in. Well, I mentioned that I was going to come back to the caisson. If you remember that one slide had it said we put in 54 caissons. Like, what the heck is that? Well, we had the design of the river, the flood protection project is kind of based on two main features. One was how wide does the channel need to be to pass the flow, and the other one was where do we have soil stability. For those of you familiar with the Red River Valley, we have a lot of soil stability issues around here. Sloughing and of the riverbanks is a regular occurrence, and so that was one of the things that really drove the design. In this case, and so where we had soil stability, we put in clay. Where we were lacking soil stability, we put in flood walls. That's basically a way to take away some of the weight. In this particular area, Reeves Drive, if you're familiar with it, there's a lot of historical homes in there. And the soil was so unstable that even putting in flood walls really wouldn't have been able to retain some of those homes. It would have had to step back so far. And because they were designated historical, they get some additional attention and consideration. So what the Corps did out here is they came up with a way of reinforcing the soil to help keep the soil from sliding. And so they came up with this plan here with these caissons. This is the reinforcing cage on those things. There are 54 of them. They're 95 feet deep, 6 foot diameter, 100 cubic yards. Interestingly enough, when they started pouring concrete down in these things, they actually forced the soil out. I think most of the time they used about 120 cubic yards on these things instead of 120, just because it forces the soil aside. This slide over here, it's kind of hard to see, but these little white dots along this edge, that's an actual aerial photo of the caissons themselves. So they're not very far apart. They're very deep, and again, it's just a reinforcement mechanism for hold the soil in place. It's just another picture of that steel rebar. Again, pretty impressive. This is heavy-duty rebar. It's hard to even catch it all in a photo, but some of those rebars are like 2-inch diameter rebar. You know, you take 6 or 8 men and they'd lift it up in a chain and carry it in their shoulders and start producing these cages. Kind of move from some of the construction into some of the operation side of the flood protection today. When when you do a flood protection project through the Corps of Engineers, they give you operating manuals and stuff. And when I'm talking about operating manuals, this will fill up like a half a wall of a library, you know, kind of thing. And they give you all the operating parameters, when you're supposed to take action and do, again, a bunch of different things. We've taken that and consolidated it down into roughly 97-point flood fight checklist. And this is a copy of one of the checklists. We tailor make these things for different reasons and circumstances, but you see there's coloring in here. Sometimes it'll indicate, okay, water department does this activity, streets does that activity, stormwater does this activity. These things are all basically arranged from low water to high water. Some of the activities start even before flood stage is hit. We've got, we list out the trigger elevation that the Corps says we need to take action. For instance, like stop log closures, you're supposed to put those in 3 feet ahead of the water getting there. When the water is 3 feet down, you're supposed to be installing these activities. So again, we also have the actual raw elevation, and you can't read it, but in the far column out here we have it also referenced by river gauge. Because when you're fighting a flood, most of the time you're dealing with a river gauge. And interestingly enough, you know, that river gauge reading will change from one flood to the next. I mean, 6 inches is not unusual that, you know, one flood, based on the raw elevation, you'll have water there, and the next time you won't. And so, again, it's variability. A lot of decisions go into this. It looks like a simple checklist, and it kind of is, but there's a lot of decision making that goes in here, especially when you get to the point about closing a major bridge between Grand Forks and East Grand Forks. For instance, if the river's at the crest and it's 2 feet below the sill, we won't put the stop logs up, even though the operation manual says you should. You know, if you're, on the other hand, if you're on a strongly rising leg on the river, we might put them in sooner. So a lot of judgment behind the scenes on this. Walk you through a quick closure example. This one happens to be on Demers Avenue. This is one of our biggest closures. We've got a closure on the road itself, and right off on the edge here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's actually a couple of pedestrian closures that also go with it. Here the street crews are out, they're pulling off the plates that are in the street. There's anchor points and things in there that they have to get out, thaw out, and get ready to receive the structural elements. This shows putting them together, basically. This is some of the vertical elements that go in there. They're setting them in the ground, and you can kind of see that's the anchor foundations in there. The second slide shows more the side bracing. So you've got a vertical element with a side brace in there to hold the stop. We call them the stop logs. And here's some of the logs actually put in place. These are aluminum beams with some rubber gaskets on them that you slide. You can kind of see you slide these things right into the verticals here. In this case, we're up a fair amount of distance up in the air, so we've got a couple guys on a lift, basically putting the beams in place. They're not particularly heavy, but they are awkward. And you especially want to be careful if you're up in the air. This is one that's been put together and closed. Again, this is Demers Avenue. You can see here's the roadway and a pedestrian closure. There's water that leaks through these things, and the amount of water that comes through is actually kind of scary. Our street crews have done some improvements on that, where they've actually sealed them better than what the manufacturers come up with. I won't get into some of the techniques, but having said that, I think it's going to be a little bit unnerving, I think, if you put 10 feet of water on that thing and see how much water is coming through the logs. We talked about the greenway. Again, that's basically the location between the levee and the river. Because it was a combined project, the greenway encompasses both Grand Forks, East Grand Forks. Lots of miles of trails. The trails are 12 to 14 feet wide, so they're pretty easy to get at. You can run a pickup and stuff, equipment up and down there, pick up trash and do maintenance activities there. You know, obviously north in the valley in here, topography is rare, and so the levees provide a topographical feature here for some winter activities. Sledding is pretty popular. We got a couple areas where we have it lit up at night, and parking, so make it convenient for people to access that and enjoy it. You can enjoy that greenway year round. Quick overview. I'm not going to go through all the numbers. Just noting the total in here. If you remember, this is a Grand Forks, East Grand Forks flood project. So those are the total dollars that went into all of the system. Of interest here, really on the Grand Forks side, our side was about $243 million. Federal share is 117, city about 74, state shares 52. Roughly how they break out. On the local side, in more detail in here, we have the state shares at 41% of the project, special assessments about 32%. We passed an additional sales tax to cover some of the cost, that's 15%. There was actually some mill levies dedicated to it, so about 12% of that came out of direct property taxes. So part of the flood protection project is recreational and educational features. So one of the things that they put in here was an obelisk. It's basically a long pole. You'll see it probably tomorrow when you go on the tour. And it was supposed to show the top 5 flood events. There's bands on this thing that essentially show where the top 5 flood events. And the original 5 flood events shown on there are no longer the top 5 flood events, just given all the flooding that we've had here in the 2000s. Again, here's some of our historical crests that we've had. Similar to Fargo, we had big events in 09 and 10 and 11. That's a picture of what the flooding looks like downtown near the Sorley Bridge, and once you get into that 48, 49 feet, that's about what it looks like. We talked about the overland flow. Here's a picture of a legal drain flooding. I think this was taken in 2020. Again, it just shows some of the ditch and the ice that's in there. Ice causes a problem with getting things opened up and draining in the spring of the year, but you also have adjacent overland flooding. Another picture of the same ditch. This road here is Merrifield Road. That's actually part of the levee. Remember when I talked about the cutoff levee that came back on the south end? That's what that is. You wouldn't really know it by looking at it. I mean, it just looks like a regular road today, but the elevations are set such that they're tied into the entire flood protection project. And I know the Water Resource District, I think we've got a couple folks here today, Water Resource District, some of the things that they do in the spring is try to get some of the ditches opened, because if you don't get the ditches open, you can't get the overland flooding out. However, there are some risks to that. This is a bad day on a backhoe. And when this happened, there was lots of ice in the channel, and basically you can't retrieve it. Here they had to wait for the water to come down. They did pluck the driver out of there without incident. If I remember right, I think they had a backhoe come over there and they basically picked him off. And in North Dakota, voila, the same location today. Obviously, we have a lot of variability in our climate, but basically we're growing some pigweed and ragweed in the bottom of those ditches today, not even cattails. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, glad to try to answer them. Mr. Axvig. I'm not sure if I understand all the question, but I think a lot of it has to do with, the elevation of buildings and things, and we're trying to, get buildings elevated. Certainly the flood will reinforce that you shouldn't be building too low to the ground. Unfortunately, those lessons are lost very, very quickly, I've found in some of the discussions. But again, that's kind of where FEMA steps in, and regulatorily they are requiring minimum first floor elevations, things like that now, that should help to keep people out of trouble. All right, I don't see any other questions. I thank you very much.
Sal, I'll take that for you. Thanks so much to Todd and Alan. Lunch will now be served. And I just have a few announcements as you're getting your food.